Hey everybody, welcome back to Andertons TV. Digital John is in the house.
Digital John.
And that is because today's video is the ultimate guide to multi-effects units for guitar players. So Mr. John, you are a native digital expert.
Guess so.
Can you explain to people in layman's terms
Sure.
what is a guitar multi-effects unit?
So these are just three examples of what a guitar multi-effects unit is. They come in various shapes and sizes, have different amounts of capacity of what they can do, but in essence, it's all of this kit and more: amps, cabs, pedals, effects units, all of that essentially that's been digitized and put in a box that we can use.
So who uses typically a multi-effects unit, and why have they become so popular over the last 10 or 20 years?
Well, I think the way you kind of phrase that question alludes to it really, because they are so flexible, and that's why they've become so popular, because you can have something from this kind of size to something, like a Cortex or something like a Kemper Helix that you see on the big tours nowadays. Everyone kind of from absolute beginner, like when I was a beginner, I started with a multi-effects unit and then ended up, using the higher end stuff because they cater for every level of player. They're very simple or very complex, depending on what you need.
So the three units that we've got are all what you would call pedal boards.
Yep.
You do sometimes see guitar effects in rack units. You also very frequently see this kind of thing just as a software product, just as a plug-in for your computer. But mostly, I think the most popular is a multi-effects floorboard. So within this type of product, John, what are the key features that people should look for in a multi-effects unit?
In my opinion, I think the first thing you need is a great amp sound straight away. And as you go through kind of cost-wise, you are going to have a bit more variety and a bit more, choice. But sticking with this Valeton GP-200, kind of down the middle, around £300, the first preset sounds great, straight out of the box.
I think you've nailed that. That's how good the amp sounds is going to affect everything beyond that, aren't they? So no matter what other functionality a multi-effects unit has, if the basic amp sound isn't one that you like, you're adding glitter onto something that you didn't really like in the first place, aren't you?
It's the heart of a guitar sound, and that needs to be inspiring for you to, want to continue playing. So.
And again, we've got a unit here that's sort of under £200. We've got our best-selling unit here, which is about £300. In fact, I say that this is also a super best-selling unit. So we've got the Quad Cortex, which is up at the sort of pro end. But in terms of the amp sounds that you would get as you go from, is it fairly typical that sort of down here we've maybe got half a dozen different amp sounds? Then as you go into the Valeton, you might have 30 or 40 amp sounds. By the time you get up to Quad Cortex, you've almost got an unlimited amount, because once you're into this technology, you have got the ability to just capture any amplifier that you want. Yeah,
and I think that's kind of by design as well, because something like the Pod Express, like for beginners, they may not know the difference between a JTM and a JCM 800. It's just a distorted sound. So I think by design, having clean is a lot simpler for beginners, and it makes it simpler. This can be used by pros, if they want, but this I think is really aimed at those beginners that just want a good clean tone or a good heavy tone. It makes it simpler, it sounds great, and it's nice and easy to use.
And if you go back to this, if we go back to the Valeton, you can see, and again, this is fairly indicative of how most of these screen displays will work. I've gone into our sort of selection of amplifiers by pressing the amp button on here, and then basically you've just got lots of different kinds of amplifiers. So like I said, there must be 30, 40, 50 on here, but we might find something that's a clean sounding amplifier. So we'd have something like this. And it's literally a case, whether you go from this unit to this unit to this unit or any other unit, you're just scrolling through lots of different guitar amp sounds, classic amps over the years, and choosing what you like.
I want to also add that all of these are emulating the speaker of an amp. At the start of this, I talked about it's the entire signal chain, speaker included. As you go through cost-wise through the units, you're going to have a bit more options in terms of parameters to tweak that. But on the cheaper units, at the more beginner end of this spectrum, you're just going to have the cab kind of included in the clean, distorted, heavy kind of sound. Makes it a lot simpler to use for those beginners.
And then as you go up through the range, you've got a wider selection of cabinets, and also now you may hear this feature called IRs. It stands for impulse response, and that again is a capture of a real speaker that you can load in and get this digital unit to emulate actual physical speakers.
Yeah.
So what's your number 2 thing that you would look for?
Again, in my personal opinion, it's usability, because you want to be able to use it and not get frustrated with it. Each of these have their own learning curve and their own interface to use. This one is very dial-based, and you can turn it and it changes. This one has a screen, it's a click joystick kind of interface. The Quad Cortex over there has a touch screen. You can just touch it, drag it around. So they each have their own thing, and you get used to it as you go. But I think it's important to take the time to learn that and just learn how each unit works. And at the end of the day, one system is going to be for you, maybe one isn't. But for me, I like the touchscreen, just being able to tactile move stuff around and turn things. So
I think a good tip actually on a lot of these units. Now, the Pod Express is designed not to be connected to a computer or a tablet or anything like that. And it's designed to be completely self-contained and super simple to use, just using the 5 knobs that are on there. Once you get into the Valeton and similarly priced products, you probably are going to have a relatively small screen with some menu options. However, you can connect most of these units to your computer.
True. Yep.
And then you get this slightly more intuitive, bigger display that as you're changing on your computer screen, it is actually changing what's in here. By the time you get onto units that have got these massive touch screens, and there aren't loads like that, but Quad Cortex, Headrush Prime, things like
Helix,
that.
pretty big one as well. Yeah.
It's not touchscreen though, is
Oh,
it?
it's
Helix?
the big screen.
Yeah, big screen. But again, all of a sudden, you very, very quickly find that you're able to get to the sounds that you want to more quickly because it's more intuitive. But totally agree. Ease of use. All 3 of these are popular, I think, because of how simple they are to use.
Yeah.
So number 3, Mr. John.
Yeah, for me, it would be the variety of sounds in the box, so to speak. So, you want a vast array of pedals like we got on this wall, ideally. And that's just going to give you a load of options tone-wise. You don't want to be shoehorned into using 2 or 3 sounds. You want to be able to experiment, use different stuff for different applications. So again, as you go through, you're going to get more of them. Different companies are going to also supply updates. So you can almost get an infinite amount. You're going to be able to access some on the cloud, which is another big part of these companies now. Users can update and give their own sounds to everyone else using the unit, which is very exciting. And you kind of get that as you go through the price points.
Let's show the people, some of the effects that you get. So if you go down to the Pod Express, you've literally got 4 knobs here: distortion, modulation, reverb, delay. Those are your effects that you're going to choose from. Very, very simple. By the time you're up into Quad Cortex, you've got, imagine every single effect that you can think of, add another 100 that you've never heard of.
Yeah.
That's what's in here. The Valeton is somewhere in the middle, relatively straightforward to use. So again, we've talked about things like reverb. So if you just give us a little strum, we'll show you what reverb is. So that sound that we're in a big church hall or something like that. Delay, if I want to switch that on, again, there are about a dozen different types of delay on this unit. But if you did a little stab, there you go, the echo, that's the delay. All of this is within a multi-effects unit is editable, so I could have bigger reverbs, smaller reverbs, longer reverbs, quicker delays, longer delays, stereo ping-ponging delays, whatever I want to do. Modulation is, imagine a sort of a modulating tone. Things like chorus is the most common, but here we go. Again, all editable. So you can see how quickly we're finding effects on here. And I think in every guitar player's journey, this is such a great way to find out what's out there. If you go down the individual pedal route, which many people evolve into, you'll spend thousands and thousands of pounds trying to buy all the effects that are in a £299 unit like this. You might end up feeling like you've got a better quality sound by the time you've gone down this route. You may or you may not. But in terms of just the journey of going, well, I don't even know what a chorus is, or a phaser, or a delay. How do I find this stuff out? This is a brilliant way of doing that. So we've just very quickly added some on. The Valeton, in fact, the Valeton and the Quad Cortex are doing a similar thing, and the Valeton's not uncommon in how this works. The visual display is showing you a pedal board.
Yeah.
So you're sort of seeing, same as the Quad Cortex is. Interestingly, I think Quad Cortex actually don't use icons that are as obvious as what they're trying to do as some brands. You know, you've got to sort of remember that your little square is your reverb and things like that. Whereas on some of the more affordable units, they'll typically, the icons will look like the pedals, so it's a bit more intuitive. But yeah, on something like this, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different things we can chain up. You can see on the Quad Cortex, you could probably have double that.
And what does, what is a point between these two on that kind of front is you can only have one amp in the Valeton, whereas on Quad Cortex you could have multiple amps and multiple instances of the same effect.
Yeah.
And that's something you pay for, probably on the next point about power and DSP and all that sort of stuff. You can have a bit more strength to lift more things with the more expensive units. Yeah.
Excellent.
Effects sound lovely in that.
Yeah, could you just, before we move on to sort of like point number 4, I think, we're not plugged into a guitar amplifier here, right? So which I guess is the point, because the unit is trying to sound like a guitar amplifier. So what are we plugged into, and what would people using multi-effects units need to be able to hear the unit?
Sure. So currently we're plugged into a very nice studio here at Andertons, but we're hearing it through 2 studio monitors. So we're hearing it in stereo. I was enjoying that tail there with the nice stereo effects. Ideally, for these sort of units, if you can have a stereo setup for monitoring, that's great, but you don't need one. If you just have a speaker or anything like a kind of PA speaker or something flat is what people call it, that's going to give you a true representation of what's going on in the multi-effects unit. So you can have a flat response cab if you want. They're essentially just a speaker that has the same sound coming out of it as you would in headphones. Or, like I just said, you could use headphones, plug it in, and you get that stereo effect.
But I guess typically, you might be thinking, oh, I haven't got any of that stuff, except that you probably have, because you probably, that's what your computer is probably, attached to, and you might have a little pair of gaming speakers or something like that.
Yeah.
And that would be okay to use for something like this.
Yep.
Number 4 on your list of things that you would find important to consider?
Sure. So I think a very essential thing for me nowadays is the amount of kind of extra features that the unit has. And as you can probably see, the back of these units look very different. Like this Pod Express is a small unit that kind of really just does a guitar sound and it goes out the back. This GP-200 has a pedal, the most noticeable difference out of all 3 of them. And that's a big factor when it comes to especially playing live and triggering other things with a pedal. You can also connect another one, they're called expression pedals for this, and that just gives you a lot more flexibility. You've got another limb where you can have loads of other tonal stuff going on. But also you can go out with jacks, other connections, USB, you can have it as an interface. And those are the things really add up when you're using it maybe in a studio rig or flying to do abroad dates where you need to have a routing set up for a specific, gig. And that's really a big lifesaver when you're on gigs and you don't really know what the ride is going to be. And it can really be great to have a flexible I/O section, input outputs.
So I think if you see a unit that's got 2 or 3 buttons on it, typically you're going to be quite limited with what that pedal can do beyond sort of perhaps going up and down through patches or, activating a tuner or something like that.
And going out via a jack all the time.
Yeah.
Right.
Once you've got, half a dozen, 8 buttons, or on the Quad Cortex you've got 11 foot switches, you've got a little bit more flexibility. You can recreate using those foot switches more like a traditional pedal board.
Yeah.
So on the Valeton and the Quad Cortex, and on anything with that number of switches, you would typically be able to go up and down through your presets. You'd be able to say, actually, on this preset, I want this to turn my overdrive on and off, and this to do my reverb, and this to do my chorus, or whatever you want to do. As John said, the expression pedal can be used for volume, it can be used for wah. Quad Cortex, and again, if you see a unit and it doesn't have an expression pedal, it probably, as long as it's got a socket on the back for an expression pedal, it just becomes an optional extra. Again, right down at the sort of lower end, you just won't have that option. It'll just be what's in there. But yeah, I think it's worth considering. Are you at a stage in your journey where all you're ever going to want to do is, if you like, just turn the whole thing on and off, or go up and down through patches? Or are you perhaps at a point where you're going to try and do little performances with it, or within your recording, you want to be able to, change sounds, turn effects on and off. And if that is what you want to do, you are going to need a few more foot switches.
Yeah, absolutely.
You did also mention routing for gigs. Now, obviously, Quad Cortex is the most professional of the 3 units we've got here. It has the most sockets on the back. Can you just sort of, in layman's terms, sort of talk about, what might be a more sophisticated routing setup than just the simple one which we've got here, which is guitar comes in, sound goes out?
Sure, yeah.
What would be more complicated than that?
So I've used the Quad Cortex on gigs where I've got an instance where I've got a cab. So I may have a cabinet and an amp, like any of these behind me, and I want that, in the room amp sound. I can go from the amp into Quad Cortex, use that in the Quad Cortex, and then go back out, route it through, a low box, and then power a cab. You could do that. Or you could go from Quad Cortex into the return of an amp, into a cab, but still have these 2 XLRs going out, because the sound man always wants a DI. If, he can have it because he doesn't have to mic up an amp on stage, and that can get very messy. A mic takes up room, so you've already got multiple things going on at once there. You've then got effects loops on that. If you want to have other pedals, Quad Cortex has got 2 effects loops, so you could have 2 different boards, or at least chains of pedals going into it, and still, going through the same signal chain in Quad Cortex, and then going out all these various places. And that's something that you wouldn't be able to do on, something like this Pod Express, which just has an in and out for a guitar. So if those sort of scenarios come up, and you maybe want to do those more advanced routing options at a gig, and even just having a fail-safe of a DI, that's also very handy with Quad Cortex. You can just pull it out of a send and route it how you want. I think that's coming across as quite a professional end. So yeah, once your guitar playing has reached a certain level of professionalism, 100%, you'll understand what all of these ins and outs do, and you'll be able to make a judgment as to what you need. So that's 4 features to consider. Is there a 5th one, or are we sort of done? Well, we are kind of done, but the overarching feature here, I think, that we haven't really talked about but alluded to, is processing power. So as you go through these units, and as we've talked about, you get more amps, more features, more ins and outs. You're going to need more processing power and DSP to deal with that, and that allows you to have more complex rigs, more complex routing, and better sound quality, sample rate, bit depth, all of those technical terms that do add up to a more realistic guitar sound, and a more flexible one as well.
I think, as with, we all know with phones and anything digital really, it's like, unlike guitar amplifiers where your Fender Twin from 1960 still sounds like a Fender Twin from 1960, this type of product, as processors move forward, processing power gets greater, manufacturers are able to make more complex algorithms around how close they sound to amplifiers. And so yes, typically this type of product, expect to see new released versions, firmware updates all the time. It's not a standing still, you don't buy one of these and then in 20 years time go, oh, here's my vintage, it's just, you buy whatever the coolest one of the day is, and then 5 years down the line, you update it for the next coolest one. It's just how it works.
And the image gets kind of clearer and sharper each month or 6 months.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, look, that's our overriding feature set. Let's see what else there is to talk about.
So I think that's probably, for now, all we can say about this. So let's have a listen to some sounds and have some final thoughts.
Cool. All right. Well, look, we'll plug into each of these separately. I think it'll be interesting to see whether or not there's anything actually audibly getting better as we go up through the range, or is it just going to be that there's more stuff as you go up through the range. But yeah, we'll start with the Pod Express. Like I say, we could have chosen, there must be 50 to 100 of these devices out there. They're all pretty good nowadays. We kind of chose these three, A, because they're super popular, but B, also because it was sort of quite obvious what the difference was between the three. But yeah, let's have a little look. I mean, I'm not even going to tell you how to use this one, John, because one of the things that's so good about that is it's just so obvious what happens when you twist buttons.
So, here's how it sounds currently. Great.
There you go, look,
straight away.
I'll give you, I'm not going to tell you how to do it, but see if you can work out how to get a clean sound, John.
All right, so I'm going to go for a chimey clean sound. So I'll go to chime. Let's not, actually, maybe a bit of boost, but let's turn that off. Nah, I'm not going to have delay. Let's turn that off. Bit of, what reverb should I go? Let's go for space. Mod. Am I allowed mod for this?
Yeah, well, I mean, you like.
I always like
See,
chorus.
look, this is. I mean, I know John's obviously played around with this sort of stuff before, but that I think is the beauty at this kind of level of price and simplicity. Is well, it might sound awful. Let's see.
Yeah,
what
I haven't heard it yet. Let's see. It's actually a bit drivey, so I might go onto the clean.
I think that sounds excellent.
Yeah.
And I do think that is something that perhaps over the last 5 or 6 years, the sound quality difference between the top end and the bottom end has really kind of done this. And actually what really separates the top end from the bottom end is just features.
Absolutely.
How much stuff.
Wholeheartedly agree.
Basic sound is pretty good even down at the lower end, isn't it? Well, dial in, so I don't know, like just play around for a bit more and then we'll plug in this and we'll do the same.
All right, let's go for a crunchy, well, actually, because we can use some effects, let's go analog delay. I'm going to go for a lead sound. Let's add overdrive to it. I'll take modulation off. Let's keep the space reverb.
I forget exactly how many there are on the Pod Express, but once you find a sound you like, you are able to store it. And I vaguely remember there are maybe 10 memory locations for storing stuff. But again, links below to go and look at the exact spec. But you don't have to dial in your sound every time. You can save them. So.
Yeah. So I've eyeballed in a lead sound, I hope.
That sounded like the intro to a Bryan Adams song where you did that. Wow, down, not Bryan. No. Maybe it was like Don Henley, Boys of Summer, something like that. I'm not sure. Could be wrong, but it's a great sound. Let me get some more of it.
Actually play with it. Yeah.
Ah, okay. Well, let's plug
good.
into the Valeton and see if that does anything you like more.
Feels good. Maybe let's go for a more crunchy rhythm sound. So I'm just going to go through this with a joystick. I'll leave the boost on with the amp.
Can I just, interestingly as well, you've done, and this is what's quite interesting, there are multiple ways that you can navigate around the Valeton
that's true.
pedal board. John went into the pedal board mode and is now scrolling through each pedal as he goes. I always like to use the shortcut keys here, but hey, John, you just do what you need to do.
I'll go with the joystick method. Again, each of these is going to have a workflow that you like, you know. I might choose, let's go Messer Julie, because I'm in that mood today. Click it, and then we've got that going. Let's now take the delay and reverb off. Do you know what? I'll do it this way.
No, he's going dry. Oof.
Yeah. I'll have a bit of reverb.
Exactly.
Again, I'll just...
It's the correct answer.
Bang it on. So. Feels good. nice and easy.
And find a nice clean sound just because?
Yep, sure. So back onto the amp. Let's go. One thing I would say about all these, each unit is going to have a different name for the same amp that you know. So let's go for dark.
He's absolutely, so it's quite complicated because, of course, for legal reasons, only Fender can call amps Fender and only Marshall can call their Marshall and only Vox. So what happens with all of these is they come up with these names like, UK Chimey or whatever, and they're all different. But as John said, they're basically all trying to emulate the same amps. So you just have to work out what amp is each sort of model trying to be, and then it gets a bit easier.
Yeah, and I've gone for dark vibra, which I can get a rough idea of what that is, and then what I've got on also some reverb and delay, and I think some modulation. Oh no, I'll turn that off. There we go, some chorus. So.
White snake me up, baby.
Feels good.
Great, excellent stuff. Well, like I say, millions more sounds on the GP-200 as well.
Yeah.
Let's finish up with your personal favourite, and I know the one that you use at home and when you're doing your professional things.
Sorry, it's a bit dirty.
That's all right. So look, do you want it same again? Just
sure.
Dial in a dirty sound and let's see.
So the first preset is a dirty JCM kind of sound. Now, can I ask, we're going to do a separate video on what's the difference between modelling and capturing. Sure.
After this one, but without giving, in a 30 seconds,
yeah.
What is the difference between modelling and capturing, and which was that? Is that a model or a capture?
So that is a model, a capture firstly. Think of it like a picture or a snapshot of a real piece of gear, whether that be a distortion pedal, amp, something like that you can then alter some parameters in real time, like EQ, maybe some drive, whereas a model is a digital recreation of a real piece of kit, like an amplifier.
Do you have a captured amp sound in there? Just
sure. Yep. So
we'll finish on that.
So this is a capture of a matchless Chieftain, and it sounds like this.
I think you do, once you get up to this level, you hear, in the transparency of all the reverbs and things like that, just that superior processing power. So I get, as a professional, why you might end up here, and then this end is for the person who's playing at home and just getting into it.
Yeah, and if you're a beginner, you might not know how an amp reacts because you've only played through something like this, but something like that with a capture, you can really dig in. I tried to demonstrate it there, especially on that kind of clean breakup kind of sound. If you play lightly, the amp will react to that, and then if you dig in on a bridge pickup, it'll distort a bit more. So you get that with the more expensive units. Right.
Well, look, we're kind of done here. Always difficult, I think, when we approach this sort of ultimate guide to multi-effects to sort of go, how do you capture? How do you take a product group where there are just dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of alternatives, each sort of fighting what's their angle, what's their thing that they do. John, I think you've done a great job of kind of explaining, and these were a good choice of 3 units just to sort of kind of give a bit of a feel for what you can do. It's a fairly fast changing product category as well as new technology comes along, but I think certainly for 2024, these 3 have been incredibly popular and are winners in their sort of price brackets. Is there an overall, the alternative to this is this, isn't it? A relatively sort of old-fashioned kind of guitar amp with pedals. So some people might say plugins are another alternative, but let's leave that debate for another. If we're sort of saying, right, I'm a guitar player that wants to play in a band or muck around at home, and it's like it's this journey or this route, you know, this route or this route. Can you sum up sort of pros and cons of each one in a way that might help people go, oh yeah, that might not be for me? Or
Sure. So if you want variety and almost future-proofing of more sounds, I would say a modeler is the way to go. If you want to be able to experiment with stuff, a modeler is the way to go. If you want something simple and to not have option paralysis, an amp is the way to go. You know, if you want something that's very just in and out, it makes a noise, you don't need many moving parts, you don't have to have a learning curve, an amp is the way to go. Because these can be a bit overwhelming if you're used to that, you know, a few knobs, a few switches and it's going. So it depends what you're kind of going for. If you want to do gigs, you know, you're going to need to do, well, you don't need something else with a modeler, but you're going to need a speaker. There's other factors like that. But for someone who is making music and enjoying creating stuff and throwing stuff at the wall sonically, I really like modelers for that, because you can experiment. But
yeah, I mean, I think, you know, John's obviously grown up in this sort of digital domain, and I think will naturally lean towards using this because he's so familiar. And I think anybody of John's age or younger will probably share that. The old duffer in the room, obviously, I think I take on board everything you've said. It is faster and simpler, I think, sometimes just to do that. I enjoy having individual pedals because I sort of have fun being able to swap and change out stuff in a way that perhaps you can't do on these. There's always been the which sounds better argument. And I suppose I'm going to fight my own corner here. Everything here is really just trying to sound like everything over here. Yeah. So for me, like the ultimate sound, like, you know, if you have a guitar player like David Gilmour or whatever, where you go, yeah, he's just like got the ultimate. He'll just have like the ultimate version of this. I do also take the point that in a band mix, audience of screaming people, even if there's just 25 screaming people, can anyone hear the difference anymore? Right. Not really. Yeah. Maybe the player can. Almost no one else can. So I do get this is pretty damn close now. But look, there you are. Those are the pros and cons. Comment section, go. What do you think? Especially if you've got some experience, maybe write something helpful in the comment section that someone with less experience will read and go, oh yeah, that was useful. Thank you, John. It's been a pleasure.
As always, thank you.
Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this sort of stuff, and we shall see you in another video soon.
See you later.